Ever wish you had like the inside scoop on Apple's recipe for success?
Yeah.
What if I told you it's less about the tech itself and more about the man behind the magic, Steve Jobs?
And honestly, I think there's no better way to decode that magic than through Walter Isaacson's biography.
Okay.
It's like a masterclass, really, in how one personality can reshape an entire industry.
We're not just talking iPhones and MacBooks here, though,
Yeah.
right? This deep dive. It's about understanding Steve Jobs himself.
Right.
Because that's the key to, like, unlocking Apple's DNA, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's fascinating how his personality bleeds into every aspect of Apple, even today.
Yeah.
Isaacson gives us these incredible glimpses into Jobs' early life, moments that really shaped his worldview, you know?
Okay, so picture this. Young Steve with his dad, and they're on this mission in a junkyard. They're scavenging for parts.
Yeah,
But it's not just about saving money.
right.
Isaacson highlights how this experience really taught Jobs the power of knowledge. Like, he was picking up on something much bigger.
Exactly. On page 219, Isaacson recounts how Jobs learned the ins and outs of those electronics, how they worked, you know, making sure he knew more about them than anyone else. This wasn't just like tinkering around. It was about gaining a strategic advantage.
It's like he realized early on that information equals leverage. Think about it. Knowing those parts inside and out meant he could negotiate like a pro, even as a kid. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that later fueled Apple's obsession with, like, controlling their supply chain, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they were applying that same junkyard wisdom, but on a global scale.
Absolutely. It's a direct line from those junkyard days to Apple's intricate manufacturing and distribution networks. Jobs wanted control, not just over the products, but over every step of the process,
Whoa.
just like he had back then.
And speaking of control, I think we have to talk about the legendary reality distortion field.
Yeah.
This wasn't just some quirky nickname. This was Jobs' superpower.
Yeah.
It really was.
Right. In Chapter 11, Isaacson describes how Jobs could convince himself, and more importantly, everyone around him, that the impossible was possible.
It's true. He'd set these insane deadlines, demand the most outlandish things, like when he challenged Wozniak to create the entire Breakout game in just 4 days.
Oh, yeah.
4 days. I mean, who does that?
Crazy.
But the amazing thing is Wozniak actually pulls it off.
Mind-blowing. Right. And you see it throughout his career, those tight Macintosh development deadlines, the relentless push for design perfection.
Yeah.
Was it manipulation? Inspiration? Honestly, it was probably a bit of both.
But you know what's so interesting about that whole reality distortion field thing?
What's that?
It wasn't just about bending reality. It was about bending people.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it really pushed everyone around him to their absolute limit.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to see how differently people reacted to it, you know?
Right.
Some people thrived under that pressure, others not so much.
Totally.
Isaacson gives us a really nuanced look at both the positive and negative impacts of this leadership style.
Totally. And, you know, that intensity wasn't just reserved for, like, deadlines or product launches, you know. It bled into every aspect of Apple, even something as seemingly simple as design.
Oh, absolutely. Design wasn't just an afterthought for Jobs, not at all.
Yeah.
It was core to Apple's identity.
Yeah.
On page 128, Isaacson talks about how Jobs insisted the original Macintosh be no larger than a phone book.
Oh, wow.
And then there's that famous story about him spending days agonizing over the design of the title bar.
Really?
You can find that one on page 132.
I have to go back and check that out.
Oh, yeah.
He was obsessive about every little detail, driven by this almost like religious fervor for simplicity.
And that's where his Zen Buddhism comes in.
Oh, interesting.
Isaacson makes this connection on page 129. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about stripping away the unnecessary, revealing the essence of the product. For Jobs, design was a philosophy, a way of life even.
And that philosophy of stripping away the unnecessary, it leads us to another key aspect of Jobs' genius, the power of no.
Yes, the power of no. It's so easy to say yes to everything, to chase every opportunity, but Jobs understood that true innovation meant being incredibly selective, saying no to almost everything in order to say yes to the few things that truly mattered.
It's true. And he wasn't afraid to make, like, tough decisions, even if it meant, like, killing off beloved products.
Right.
Like the Newton.
The Newton, a perfect example, page 338. Here was this handheld PDA with a loyal following, but Jobs saw that it didn't fit into his grand vision for Apple's future.
Wow.
So he killed it.
Which, I mean, it seems ruthless, but I can see how it also created the space for something new, something better.
Exactly. And what's so brilliant about this is that it wasn't just about saying no to the Newton, right? It was about making room to say yes to the iPod, to iTunes, to this whole ecosystem of seamlessly connected devices that we now know as, like, the Apple ecosystem.
It's true. He was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He had this vision for a digital hub, as Isaacson calls it, on page 530, where your content, it wasn't confined to just one device, but it flowed effortlessly between them.
It's funny because he was essentially predicting that Apple's biggest competition would be .Apple.
What do you mean? You mean like with the iPod and then later like the iPhone?
Exactly. The iPod was a massive success, but Jobs knew they couldn't afford to get complacent. He recognized, and this is where that term innovator's dilemma comes in on page 530, that to stay ahead of the curve, sometimes you have to disrupt even your own winning products.
Wow.
And that's exactly what he did by transitioning from the iPod, a product that was at its peak, to the world of streaming and the cloud.
That's kind of wild when you really think about it. Like he had the foresight to understand Apple couldn't just, rest on its laurels, even with something as commercially successful as the iPod.
It takes guts, for sure, to be willing to cannibalize your own success like that.
Totally.
It's a trap so many companies fall into, the innovator's dilemma, but not Jobs.
Oh.
He was already looking ahead, envisioning a world where the devices themselves were, less important than, like, the seamless experience they provided.
And that's where his vision for the App Store and iCloud and all of that really comes into play, right? He was crafting an ecosystem, not just individual products.
Exactly. And he knew that to make that ecosystem a reality, he needed to be able to, rally people around his vision, just like he did with those tight deadlines and ambitious product designs we talked about.
So we're back to the reality distortion field again, I guess.
In a way, yeah. It's almost as if he used that reality distortion not just to bend deadlines or defy technical limitations, but to, will his grand vision into existence.
It makes you wonder, though, could someone without that intensity, that almost unreasonable drive, have achieved the same things with Apple? Could a more, conventional CEO have pulled it off?
It's a fascinating question. Was Jobs' personality, with all its complexities and contradictions, essential to Apple's success? Or could someone else have steered the ship, maybe with a different approach, and gotten similar results?
It's tough to imagine Apple without Steve Jobs at the helm.
It really is. And that, I think, speaks volumes about the indelible mark he left. On the company, on the tech industry, really on the world, we're all living in the reality that Steve Jobs, in a way, helped to create.
That's a pretty profound thought to end on. It's been quite a journey unpacking the life and legacy of Steve Jobs through, the lens of Walter Isaacson's insightful biography.
It really has.